The screw is mightier than the nail. This is what I believe. The reasons are as follows. Reason 1. The head of a nail is small, and striking it with a hammer consistently and with accuracy is genuinely difficult. This action requires strength and technique, neither of which can be learned. It takes practice. The end result of this practicing is that for a stretch of time, after first beginning on your carpentry journey, you are going to find yourself with a lot of bent nails and damaged wood. Because when you aim for a nail and miss, you will make contact with the piece of wood instead, and that will damage it. There is nothing to be ashamed of here. Difficult technical skills and abilities take time to learn, and whilst we are learning, it is important to be honest with ourselves. I am not very good with my hammer. I don't use it often enough. My success ratio with it is probably around the 50% mark, in that the chance of me successfully nailing something together first time is no better than the flip of a coin. Also, all my nails are old and rusty. I just don't use them. But because they are rusty, they bend more easily and make it more likely for me to fail. I don't like nails. I do like screws. Using a screw requires very little technical ability, in that it is a skill that can be taught. As long as the correct screw bit is being used for that particular screw, as long as the power drill has the correct settings, and as long as you are applying the right amount of force, the screw will find its way into the piece of wood. And if any of those things are done wrong, there is very little chance of damaging the wood. It just won't screw in properly. This is reason 1, because hammering a nail is difficult. Reason 2. Wood does not like impacts. I'm not talking big wood projects here, like houses or something. That is a completely different scale. I'm talking furniture, and I'm talking thin pieces of wood. Impacts on these kind of wooden projects will cause splits and splinters. Not all of the time by any means, but if we are using hundreds of nails, it is inevitable that it will go wrong at some point. A screw, however, can be used such that it slowly levers its way into the wood. We can go as slowly as we like and it makes very little difference. The screw will find its way in there eventually. There are no sudden impacts or jerky movements, just a smooth, consistent, controllable action. If it starts to go wrong, we have plenty of time to stop ourselves and readjust before serious damage is done. When we are fixing two thin pieces of wood together, we want the fixing action to be slow and smooth. A hammer and a nail are the opposite of that. Reason 3. When we are nailing two pieces of wood together, we will generally place one piece on top of the other and proceed to hammer, and we will continue until the nail is entirely in. The problem is that the action of the hammer has force, and if we misdirect that force, then it won't entirely act vertically. It will act a little bit horizontally. That small horizontal force tends to move the pieces of wood that we are fixing together, and thus when the action is complete, the two pieces won't line up exactly as intended. In non-technical terms, hammer causes jiggle, jiggle moves wood, wood fixes in wrong location. The power drill and the screw are different. For a start, the action is being performed much slower, so any small sideways forces are much smaller and therefore less forceful. Second, all of our force is being directed down the power drill, so it shouldn't be acting in any horizontal direction. And third, that force is controlled and regular. It isn't erratic or dependent on a difficult technical skill. The point is that with a screw, it is possible to be more accurate more of the time. Most of the time. Pretty much all of the time in my opinion. Reason 4. A screw has a thread, and that thread is designed to lever the screw into position when it is rotated. But that thread will also act to pull a joint together. It will provide a force which pulls the two pieces of wood towards each other. When these two surfaces are also glued together, which I would recommend doing 100% of the time anyway, this binding force provided by the screw creates an incredibly strong bond. The screw is effectively clamping the two pieces together whilst the glue dries. Acting together, the screw and the glue creates a very resilient joint. The hammer and the nail does not have this feature. In my experience, when trying to fix two pieces of thin wood together, it is very difficult to form a strong, reliable bond with nails and glue. There will likely be gaps where the two surfaces are not in contact with each other, and even if they are, they won't be bound by anywhere near the amount of force, and thus the glue won't dry with the same level of resilience or strength. Reason 5. Nails rely on surface friction to stay in place, i.e. the friction caused between the surface of the nail and that of the wood under the pressure caused by forcing the nail into the wood in the first place. Those are the only forces acting on the nail to keep it fixed in place. From an engineering perspective, for surface friction read slip. Any system solely reliant on surface friction is liable to slip and move over time. The amount of friction being applied to the nail is dependent on the pressure being exerted on it by the wood, which over time will relax, and thus the surface friction will reduce. The thread on a screw, however, not only levers it into place and provides a force to bind the two surfaces together, but it also creates a mechanical connection between it and the wood which is incredibly strong. The system isn't relying on surface friction at all. It is effectively keyed into the wood, each thread cutting into it and resisting any efforts to pull it out. Reason 6. Screws can be removed. If a mistake has been made or we have changed our mind, screws can be removed easily and without fuss. It is literally just as easy to put a screw into a piece of wood as it is to extract one. Now, if a nail has been bent and ruined before it has reached the surface of the wood, then it can be extracted using the claw end of a hammer or with a crowbar. We would want to be mindful not to exert too much force. We don't want to damage the wood, but overall it is a pretty simple endeavour. However, if the nail has reached the surface of the wood such that we can't get a claw hammer or crowbar underneath the head of it, then we are stuffed. That nail is in there and it ain't coming out. Not without an immense amount of pain and suffering. We could really easily ruin the item of carpentry we are working on simply by trying to extract a nail from it. Closing statements. We haven't discussed nail guns, which are probably more reliably accurate, require less technical ability, and have well-directed, controlled amounts of force. But their impact is much more severe. Firing a nail from one of these into any relatively thin piece of wood is going to ruin it quickly, in my opinion. We haven't discussed plywood. In my workshop, I mostly use plywood, sometimes really cheap plywood. And cheap plywood really doesn't like nails being hammered into their edges. Reliability of the contact, the amount of surface friction is bad. Reliability of the construction of the plywood itself is bad. The layers just come apart. Using nails on the edges of plywood, particularly cheap stuff, is almost completely pointless. This is a pretty big reason as to why I only use screws. The final thing to say is on the aesthetics. A screw is not an attractive thing. If you are trying to make a beautiful piece of furniture, it is understandable that you wouldn't want to see loads of screw heads. I understand that. It isn't how I feel, but I can definitely understand how one might look at a screw and consider it ugly. That is fair. And, I don't have any rebuttals to that. It is ugly. We can cover the screw heads with some kind of filler before varnishing or painting, and that can go some way to alleviate the issue. To be honest, if we are painting the thing, then I almost consider the ugliness of the screw less of a problem. We can just polyfiller it and we're all good. But a varnished object with dozens of visible screw heads, that's ugly, right? It depends on what we think is ugly. My belief is that the beauty of an object comes down to the fundamental design and function of the thing, the idea behind its creation. Beauty, for me, is achieved by focusing on all the other things that don't matter to beauty first, and then letting whatever attractiveness there might be to emerge over the course of its design and construction. And use. I have thrown objects away and remade them because their use did not match with their function and were therefore not beautiful in my opinion. On those stakes, the idea of seeing a few ugly screw heads is, in my opinion, completely irrelevant.